Good afternoon from my side. It's always strange to speak to the full room of blank screens. So sometimes I have feeling I'm speaking to myself. So I hope you're there. And welcome you all. I hope you're enjoying the MOOC so far. As I can see, some people are already in it. Some people are getting into it. But it's an exciting thing, I think, to dig into the ETS competence model, to see how it relates to my reality, to your reality. What can you do about it? So my involvement in Yokomo, as Lavana said a little bit, was in designing the course called Yokomo Systemic, or Systemic Approach to Competence Development. And so far, we did as a residential course in Latvia, we did it as an online version, and we did it also as a second MOOC. So in case you like this MOOC, you will have opportunity to join another MOOC relatively soon. And as Laimla said, we are also doing training for trainers at the moment. We actually see Ayad here, so welcome Ayad. He's one of our participants in the training for trainers at the moment. I hope this short intervention of mine will maybe motivate you to dig deeper into the MOOC and into the topic of competence development, since I would like to perhaps a little bit widen the perspective about what are competencies and how they are developed. And thanks a lot for all people who send their questions in the registration form. That really helped me a little bit to fine tune the content of this intervention. And I would like really to dig into these concepts of holistic and systemic and how they relate. Are they two different things, or they relate? And we believe they relate very naturally and very genuinely. So it will be also a moment to explore. So, but before I go into the story and into more kind of input part, I would like to do one little exercise with you. And for that, you don't need to have too many material around you. It's just things around your desk, around your table. Maybe you need a little piece of paper, a pen, and a couple of objects that you have around. It could be cups, it could be markers, it could be paper clips, it could be erasers, whatever you have on your desk. We might need them for the next 10 minutes exercise. So on my next screen, you can see me on the next screen, but you can see there only my hands and a little bit of my desk there. So I hope you have a little bit of space on your desk where you're sitting at the moment. So we'll ask you actually to do a little exercise using the space on your desk and some objects that you have. So for the beginning, I would like to ask you, actually, no matter if you really know the ETS competence model so far, but probably you know yourself good enough that you think about, if you think yourself as a youth worker or somebody that works with young people or with groups of young people, and probably you have many competencies that you have many competencies that you are using in your daily work, in your projects. Wherever you work, is it a youth center? Is it just an organization? So if you think about yourself in this professional role, I will ask you to choose one competence. So just one. So one competence that you feel is very important, that is very essential for your work, something that you demonstrate really well when you work with young people. And I will just ask you to go a little bit beyond knowledge. So it's not just knowledge about something, but it's more about some kind of something that has an attitude flavor. So what competence you have in the way you relate, let's say, to the groups of young people and to young people in general. So one competence of yours. Think for a second. And then when you have it, I will ask you to write it down on a small piece of paper, that competence. It can be just keywords, it could be just a little sentence, but it could be, yeah, just for you, what is this essential competence that you already have? And if I think, for example, for myself, I think probably one of the things that I demonstrate is tactfulness, I would say, tactfulness. A sense of sensitivity for differences and maybe not acting too fast sometimes, but just being maybe more cautious with differences and tactfulness. I think tactfulness probably is one of the things that I demonstrate in my work. So I will ask you to write down your competence and put it on your desk like this, and on the little piece of paper. And if you've done that, you can give me a sign with your digital symbols or that you've done it, so I can go in the next step. Okay, thanks a lot, Marianne. So others, if you have your one competence, something that you demonstrate well, and yes, thank you, Henry, just write it down on a small piece of paper on your desk. Thank you. I see some. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, good. So now, when you focus on this tactfulness or your competence that is there, I will ask you now to really relate yourself, to really relate to this competence. And when you really relate to the competence, also sense how it feels in your body when you are focused on that competence. So first is really, where do you feel it? Where do you find it in your body when you're connected to that competence? What happens inside of you? Okay. And then I will ask you to, in your mind, to make a little zoom out and rewind in your mind the film and wonder about these moments and about these people that actually helped you develop this competence. So it could be other persons or the groups of other people, but it could be some significant events. And probably you will remember some from a more recent past. For example, you might go back in your mind and remember, yes, that was this training course that actually helped me a lot realize how this sensitivity is important. And I will ask you to choose one object from your table and just place it behind this competence. And this represents this training course, for example. You might also remember people that probably acted as mentors or supporters, somebody who gave you feedback or somebody who encouraged you to develop that. And then I ask you to take another object and put it also behind this competence. So you have training, you have mentors. Then maybe you might also have another colleagues that maybe you learned from, maybe other people from your organization, other people from your project. And then also take one object also for them, so for your colleagues. Then probably there will be also groups of young people that you led, that you worked with, but at the same time, you also learned from them. So it's not that you've been just teaching them and facilitating their learning, but also they had to learn and develop this competence further. So maybe an object for groups of young people, or maybe a specific group of young people that actually contributed to that. So you can also use one object also for those young people. Then a little bit further zooming out and wondering, what were these challenging moments in life that you faced? And from these challenging moments, you understood how important is to develop this competence. So take one object for these challenging moments that were great teacher. Challenging moments are great teachers. So what were the challenging moments in your life actually where you actually had such an insight that this competence is important to develop? So what were the also perhaps maybe some moments of failure, or maybe moments where you felt, oh, I didn't do it really well, or I really failed this time, but these moments actually led me to understand how tactfulness is important. And take one also object for these failing moments. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And then maybe if you zoom out a little bit more, you might also see some other people in your history, in your past, in your belongings, maybe in the wider systems that you belong, maybe in your family system. And when you look at that in the past, or what's behind you, when you demonstrate this competence, who might be smiling at you? Who might be pleased that you have demonstrated this competence? Who might be pleased that you've learned how to be tactful? And then you take one more object for that person or the persons who might be smiling at you that you've learned this competence. And last, probably not the least, because there might be probably more elements for you there. Take something for an object, for something that comes from a wider system where you belong. It could be a region, a country, part of the world. Also something representing something that led you learn how this is important. So something bigger than family, some bigger belonging that actually led you see, oh, this is so important to learn and to develop. And then take one object for that. It could be pleasant, it could be less pleasant, but it's part of the history where you are. So take one object for that history. And probably you have something, I'm just checking, some picture that look more or less like this. You might have more object as well. Mm-hmm. And I will ask you now, when you look at your competence now, with all these people, all these groups, and all these events behind, what happens in your body? What has changed? And what do you realize now? And if it feels right for you, you might say innerly, thank you for all these learning opportunities. And you might tell it to all of them or individually to each of them. Thank you. And if it feels right, you may tell them, I will make sure I will pass it forward. In my work with young people and beyond. Have a look one more time and take what you feel is needed to be taken from this image. Okay. Yeah, I can leave my picture here. Maybe it's like this. So thank you. Probably this is already a demonstration about holistic and systemic two-in-one. And sometimes I wonder if I need to speak more than this. But still, let's make a little bit of sense of what we've done at the moment. So one of the questions in the registration form was, what's holistic and what's systemic about competence development and how these two actually connect? And I can tell you from experience of Yokomo Systemic, our understanding and growing, I think, grown over the years. So we started more or less end of 2019, wondering how these words actually fit with youth work. Is it something that we would like to impose on youth work, or, you know, bringing something from somewhere else? Limonos mentioned systemic coaching, and I was wondering, is it something that we bring from systemic coaching to youth work, and now we would like to teach youth workers to do something differently? But then we realized that no, it's not true. Actually, it is already there. Maybe sometimes not called this way, but it's already there. And probably one thing that we've learned is this, that youth work is systemic by nature. This practically means that when you look at your role as a youth worker, yes, you work with young people, but also around you and around these groups of young people, there are so many other actors and other events, but especially other actors involved in what we call a youth work system. And youth work system is not a bureaucratic system, it's a living system of relations. And in this system of relations, you have others like community, you have parents, probably, teachers. Depending of your own youth work system, you have more and more elements there. And some of them are in direct connection, some of them more invisibly connected. So in a way, by being engaged in youth work, you're already engaged in a youth work system. So even if you're not calling it this way, youth work is systemic by nature. Second thing is, if you look at ETS competence model that you're exploring in the MOOC, you can already say ETS competence model is holistic by design. And I saw when Limonos was sharing the modules that are coming, and probably when you get into the modules around attitudes, and importance of attitudes for competence development, it will be very clear that in order to develop competencies, you need a whole person. You need a full whole person to be engaged. And in a way, if you collect these two together in one picture, you can say, yes, but then when we speak about competence development, we have to see it as a holistic and a systemic process. So in more concrete terms, it looks like this. If you remember, if you imagine your youth work system as a connection of elements, where some of them are young people, some of them are others, with certain boundaries there. These boundaries are usually not so visible, but it's clear where the connections come and where the influence comes. So probably you think about your youth work system as your local youth work, but it can also be a national level youth work system or European. So it depends how big the Zoom is. But everything is interconnected in your youth work system, and you are part of it too. So a couple of insights we had is that, as I said already, youth work is systemic by nature. It happens within a system, in a living system with multiple actors involved, where everybody is connected, visibly or invisibly. Sometimes you're more aware of these connections, sometimes you're less aware of these connections. As a youth worker, you relate to the parts of the system, but you also relate to the system as a whole. Therefore, for example, would be very interesting exercise that we do sometimes in a Yokomo systemic is mapping your own youth work system and wondering, what exactly do I do for this system? So not what I do for young people only, that's part of it. But if you take yourself in the context of your whole youth work system, wondering, so what's my function here? What exactly do I do for this system as a whole? And from there, you might also wonder, yes, if this is my role to play, at least currently, what competence I need to develop in order to do that role well? Or perhaps maybe you wonder which role I may take in the future. Maybe I need to shift my role. Like, for example, in this picture, you see yourself somewhere a little bit more in the center, but maybe you need to shift yourself a little bit somewhere a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, which immediately shifts all other elements inside of the system. So what's my role and what's my function there? And one thing that we also did with this little exercise that we did in the beginning, what we learned is that competencies are not developed in vacuum, meaning that you cannot sit and develop competencies on your own. Of course, you can read, you can get some information, maybe even learn some little bit of skills. But for essential competencies to be fully developed, you need other people. And other people meaning interaction with young people, interaction with other actors and players in your youth work system. And all that happens to you is a situation that has an opportunity for learning. So sometimes you learn the most from the most challenging ones. Perhaps maybe you have very challenging local government, which maybe doesn't fund youth work, but probably it forces you to find different ways to deal with situation and develop some competencies that you maybe don't have. So these are all our under quotation mark teachers. And competencies in that sense are co-created and co-owned, which is a very interesting concept if you look from the point of how we typically speak about competencies. And typically we speak about competencies as some objects that we actually take from one place, we put in our box or toolbox or CV and get them somewhere else. And then we often speak about these are my competencies, and it's true. You said yes, you've been engaged into learning, you expressed your motivation, you expressed your commitment, but at the same time, without these other people, other groups, other situations, you were probably not able to develop them. And therefore, we speak about competencies or competence development process as co-creation, and competencies are kind of co-owned. And as you saw in the beginning of the presentation, we sometimes say it takes a whole system to develop a youth worker. Like paraphrasing the African proverb, it takes a village to develop a child. So it takes a whole system to develop a youth worker. And sometimes these connections are not so clear. In the exercise that you've done today, you could see sometimes that it's not just one event or one situation or one group of people that actually led to development of competencies. So it's not just Yokomo MOOC that will help you develop your youth work competencies. Probably there are many other moments before you join Yokomo MOOC which actually led you to enroll the course. And this is the interplay. So we don't think of learning and development of competencies as a linear process. It's more true to see it as a kind of map, which is very interactive map, interrelated. And there are these moments when everything comes together. But you cannot say this was just this moment or this situation that actually led to my competence development. Everything that happened before somehow created conditions for that. So that's why we see it's more accurate to see it in a more map, to zoom out on the whole system behind. When you speak about holistic, then the picture becomes a bit more colorful. So you see in systemic, you're a little bit black and white, but in holistic, you get a bit more colors. And that's how holistic and systemic come together. So one thing is we see holistic competence development as a holistic process. So it's not just your mind, it's not just your brain, but it's also heart and body and soul and spirit all together that are involved in the process of competence development. Where holistic and systemic come together is the fact that actually your main organ of knowing is not your brain, it's actually your whole body. And you use your whole body to belong to your system. You use your whole body to connect to the people around you, to the groups around you, to all these elements and actors inside of your system. So that's why I speak about whole body knowing or whole body learning, which is not just using your brain or using your mind. This becomes very clear when it gets to the topic of attitudes. And in the couple of modules in the MOOC, you will be exploring this point exactly. And as Yokomo is promoting and the ETS model in the back, saying that competence development can start at any point. You can start with knowledge, you can start with skill, you can start with attitudes. But somehow the attitudes are a little bit more important than the rest. You can also say knowledge and skills are not enough to be fully competent. You need to have attitudes as well to activate this competence fully and to give the flavor to it. So when the attitudes are not there, somehow the competence is not fully developed. And in order to develop attitudes, you need your whole body and you need relation to other people. You cannot develop attitudes just on your own in a vacuum, as we said. So therefore, holistic and systemic are coming hand in hand. So in a way, if you look at systemic, it's more like looking at external, kind of what's wider. It's kind of what's my external constellation and how do I relate to people in this wider image, wider map of mine. And when you look at holistic, it's more like looking inside of myself and looking at my internal or inner constellations, how my brain and heart and body are connected, or if they're not, why they're not. So this is your organ of knowing and competence development. So in a very, very nutshell, if I could say, probably competence development process is an interplay of zooming out, checking in with your system, and zooming in, checking it with your body. And somehow these two things go hand in hand. And probably it will be interesting to reflect on that while you are engaged in MOOC, and especially while you're engaged in practical experiences outside of the online course. So when you're in a direct relation with other people and groups, and just sense not just what's going outside, but also what's going inside of myself, and how the different parts of me are connected. In the Yokomo Systemic, we also said it would be useful to develop 3 systemic skills, and this is what we do in the course. So if you enroll the next MOOC and or Yokomo Systemic, if it comes one day again physically, these are probably 3 systemic skills that we learn or try to support participants in learning. And one is zooming out, exactly this ability to see yourself within the wider picture, within the wider context, to understand your role, to see yourself, what's calling you inside of this system, and what exactly, where the change is needed, and how to recognize these moments of change and what exactly your role will be in them. And the other one is more about understanding these interconnections. So it's not just to say that things are interconnected, but also to see the patterns, which is a little bit about how the things are connected and why they are connected that way. And we all have patterns, our systems have patterns, we as people have patterns, and question is where these patterns are coming from, and also do these patterns serve us or block us? Do we need to outgrow some of them? So the starting point is really awareness of all these patterns that sometimes support our development and sometimes block our development. One interesting thing about patterns is sometimes we have some patterns which are so dear to us that sometimes we believe that we are the patterns, that actually are part of our identity. And sometimes, I know in the coaching practice, it's sometimes so difficult for some people to outgrow some patterns, because sometimes they believe, like, if I let this pattern go, or if I outgrow this pattern, who will I be then? But this is these moments when actually, in order to move forward, you will need to outgrow them. And the last one is, I think I mentioned already, is about whole body knowing. So using your whole body to know, to sense, to get some information from your system, which is just beyond the rational mind and thinking. And interesting thing, just simply by being part of a system, by belonging to a system, in a way, we are kind of plugged in a Wi-Fi network of this system. So we actually get much more information that we normally think we have. And this is what we call sensing, and this is also what we practice in Yokomo Systemic course. So that's all from my side, a little bit of input to understanding of holistic and systemic.
Thanks a lot, Darko. That was inspirational. Looking if there would be any questions or comments from the audience. And yeah, you're getting some reactions, I can see. Feel free to use reactions, actually, if you have a reaction to express, but also if you want to ask or clarify on any aspect that Darko mentioned, feel free either writing in the chat or just click on reactions, raise hand, so we know that you want to speak, and you can ask your question directly. Calypso is asking, can you elaborate what do you mean by the system?
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Calypso. This is really one of the questions we have to dig before going into. Probably what the exercise we did in the beginning gives you a bit more flavor. So if you look like everything behind the competence that you've developed, you can see them as part of your system. So in other words, when we speak about system, we don't mean system in a bureaucratic administrative terms, like, you know, sometimes we speak about state system, or so even below this bureaucratic system, there's a still living system. You know, that's also interesting. For example, in organizations, you have usually reality of the organized system on the surface, but underneath there's a living system of an organization. And actually the living system shows what exactly is happening inside of this organization and what exactly is needed for organization to perform well. While something on the surface is just about what people invent. It's more policies, practices, procedures, management tools. So when we speak about system, we speak about living system, like a family. Every family is a living system. You know, every school is a living system. Every community is a living system. And in that sense, we are part, we belong, and we belong to multiple systems at the same time. So you can imagine like a peacock tail. You know, the peacock tail, you have these tail feathers behind you. And there's a guy from England called John Whittington. He speaks a lot about peacock tail. So you can imagine having a peacock tail behind you, like with feathers, you know, like peacock has feathers. And if you imagine that every feather in the peacock tail is one of your systems that you belong. So it could be family, it could be professional, it could be youth work system, it could be community, maybe a national system, could be something bigger, European youth work system. And then you can sense how are these belongings. Sometimes they are connected, sometimes they are clashing, but this is all part. For the Yokomo Systemic MOOC, we also made a very nice animation video, which actually is in a couple of minutes exactly showing that. What do we mean by systems? So I really invite you also to look at that video and maybe get a little bit more information about what do we mean by system. Maybe a fun thing from my side is when I was younger, like maybe 20 years ago or more, I was very much into punk music, and we always had this negative image, negative connotation of word system. So usually system is something that is against you, you know, something that works against you, and you're fighting against it. But in the context that I'm talking now, in the context of a living system, you are part. You're not against, you're not for, you're just part of the living system. And the moment you shift, every other part also shifts.
Thanks a lot, Darko. And Francisco shared a comment in the chat that he feels he was trained to see more negative patterns, or patterns understood as a negative character features, and now a bit of discovery actually to look a little bit broader to this, or a diverse patterns that we have. Some of them helping perhaps, yeah.
Yes, I would say not. I think patterns are not necessarily negative. I think that's and actually all patterns that they came to our lives, so they came to the lives of organizations. There was a moment when they served something, when they served survival, when they served some improvement at one moment. Then they served a certain moment. What happens often then after a while, when the context changes, the society shifts, then you realize that these patterns are not serving me or not serving our organization anymore. And that is the moment when they become blocking. But originally, they've been probably very useful. So you can also say probably even today, there might be also lots of patterns that actually are very useful and supportive. Not all the patterns are blocking.
Thanks, Darko. Giselle.
Yeah, it's just now it's a bit gone because patterns came in the middle, but it was connected to the question of what is the system and your explanation, Darko. I know also very often when we try to explain how we approach Yokomo, the courses, the learning processes that we develop, there's this confusion about the word systemic, and it's usually what I call the other systemic that comes in the mind of the people. So perhaps it's also good, I don't know if you feel like now, but to perhaps highlight the main differences between our systemic approach, so connecting to the system as you described it, and the more traditional systemic coaching, or I'm not sure if this is possible now or relevant now.
I'm not sure if I can do that so simply. But at the same time, it's very simple. I think it comes back to the first sentence I had said today, that youth work is systemic by nature. And I really believe so. I think so. So this awareness that there is much more there in the picture than just me and young people. There's much more there. they're my colleagues, they're my supporters, they're my mentors, they're people who are challenging in the environment. We are all part of this system. And what I find very beneficial is also to think about what is my place in this system, and do I act from the place of strength, or do I act from the place of weakness? Do I make myself bigger, or do I make myself smaller in relation to others? Or how does that happen? That can also be a pattern. It can also be a pattern that traditionally in some systems, youth workers make themselves smaller than the others. But is it actually true? Or maybe even bigger. It can also be that sometimes you make yourself bigger than others in the system. The question is, does it give you more strength, or doesn't weaken the system? So this is quite interesting reflection about to see and to realize where's your place from which actually you can act from the benefit of the system as a whole, and also from the benefit of young people, and for the benefit of the purpose that actually you're doing this work for.